Now, it was in January 2010 that Kay Gilderdale walked out of court, found not guilty of the attempted murder of her daughter Lynn. She had pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of assisting suicide, but was freed. Her case prompted yet again widespread discussion about the right to die and the position of any relative who might help a loved one on their way. Well, Kay has written a book, One Last Goodbye, telling the story of her life with Lynn, who became ill at 14 and died when she was 31. I spoke to her earlier and she told me how a lively, sporty girl suddenly changed.
It happened very suddenly. She went off to school as normal that morning, had a BCG vaccination. I had a call in the afternoon to go and pick her up from school. She attempted to go back to school the next day, and again I got a call. And from that point on, over the next 3 months, she got a lot of infections and went dramatically downhill. And that was in late November. By May, she was totally bedridden, tube-fed, paralysed, couldn't speak, couldn't remember, had terrible muscle spasms, sickness, pain. So it was a very dramatic change from the really healthy young girl that we had.
And what kind of help did you get from the medical profession?
In the beginning, we have still a wonderful GP, and she did her best to advise us and, give Lynn antibiotics. But as time went on and Lynn didn't recover and she kept getting more infections, we began to get more worried. And Lynn collapsed and was taken to hospital by emergency. And that was our first taste of how you're treated if they do tests and they come back negative. And we were told to send her straight back to school and that we shouldn't have kept her home for that length of time. Why was she at home? And we said, oh, she's very ill. But as a result, she was referred to a consultant who diagnosed her with ME, and he was fine. He said, you're lucky, you've got a very sort of fashionable disease, and you'll be fine. I'll look after you.
This was at the time when we were hearing about chronic fatigue syndrome and ME and yuppie flu. What sort of things were thrown at you that made you feel that people thought she was just putting it on?
Well, initially, when she got her diagnosis, we followed the instructions of the doctor, which were basically graded exercise and that, but she continued to deteriorate and became very, very unwell. And it was then when she needed to be hospitalised and she went to London hospitals, we began to run into very serious problems with doctors and nurses telling her she was pretending that she was a silly little girl, that she could do this, she could do that. And it was very upsetting and distressing because we were already very worried about her, and we knew there was something seriously wrong because we could see the change in her from how she was to how she was now, not able to do, any of the things that she could do before. And we were sort of really frantic to get some answers.
Some of them actually hinted at abuse. How did you cope with that? I mean, clearly it was your husband who was the prime suspect that they pointed to, where there had been absolutely no abuse. How did you deal with it, the two of you?
It was very stressful, and I felt very, very angry because I knew what a good father Richard was, and husband and everything. And Lynn was very upset because it was actually Lynn who overheard it, the nurses saying it. And Richard was very angry, so we confronted the nurses and the nursing sister, who they apologised because they had no basis to make assumptions like that. They just decided, they looked at Lynn, who was ill, who had ME, and this sort of thing happened many times, through the years of Lynn's illness, where people, sometimes nurses who'd never even met Lynn, heard the label ME and jumped to the conclusion that there was some psychological cause. I was accused of things as well, and they hadn't even set eyes on her.
Now, this went on for years and years and years,
yes.
From Lynn being 14 to being 30.
21.
How did you manage the level of care she needed?
When she was at her very worst, when she went into hospital in August of 92, and we had put all our faith in this hospital being able to help her, and in fact she was abused terribly while she was in there. I came to the point...
When you say abused, you mean that she was forced to do things that wasn't able to do?
Yes. And they had told us that they believed in ME as an organic illness, but it became apparent that they didn't, because they actually said to us the very last thing that made us decide to get her out of there was that they actually asked us, can we use force? And that was it. So I came to a decision at that point that even though before then I felt I couldn't look after her at home because she was so ill, I didn't feel capable that I had enough skills to do it. At that point, I felt whatever I did at home had to be better than what's happening to her in hospital. So I was determined that was going to happen. So we took her home and just learnt how to do it. At times, it was like an intensive care in her bedroom. You know, with IV drips and everything else. But even with that, she had 50, 60 hospital admissions where she then became so acutely ill that she needed sort of like blood tests every few hours and drips of things that weren't allowed at home. I could give her IV fluids, but not all, medications through a drip. So you had to just learn. Our GP was wonderful, taught me what I needed to know. I taught Richard, Lynn's dad. And we just coped because we knew the alternative. We knew there was no appropriate place for Lynn to be in a hospital because there isn't anywhere that really is appropriate for somebody who is as ill as that, with noise and light sensitivity and all the other things, and the lack of understanding. So,
at what point did she lose hope and tell you she wanted to die?
She, for many, many years, had hope and believed firmly that she was going to recover, and I did too. And to the extent that she would talk about the future, she'd buy clothes, when she was able to look at the internet. For years she couldn't look at television or anything, but when she could, we'd choose clothes together that she was going to wear when she was doing this, when she was doing that. And in 2005... now we can sort of pinpoint that it's when the change happened. She was having a routine procedure of a Hickman line, which is a tube into a vein near her heart where you would inject medication and fluids could go in. She was having that changed and her lung was punctured, and she ended up in intensive care and life support machine and 3 months in hospital. Before that, when they were putting her to sleep to intubate her, she said, please don't let me die. And we said, no, you're not going to die. But after that, she started talking not very often, but occasionally saying that she felt that her body was too broken, that am I going to get better? And then she started saying, I am too broken and I don't think I can go on like this anymore. And she started to look up things because she had a lot of conditions that came in, some as a result of chronic illness, and others that were connected to her neurological damage in ME that took time to affect sort of glands and organs in her body. And she knew this. She was very intelligent, and as her memory improved, she was able to look up things herself. And she had fought so long and so hard and suffered on a daily basis, and she just thought, I can't do this anymore.
And at what point did you decide that you would help her die?
She had been talking about it in her sign language, because she couldn't speak, for about 2 years, and they started off gradually, then more frequently, and then started researching things herself and looked up about Dignitas, the clinic in Switzerland, and she sent me the information she found from her computer to my computer and wrote an email asking me if I would help her go through it. And then she started speaking about that, and she asked me if I'd fill out the form to apply to go there. And the discussion went over months. Everything took time, and she tried to gently explain to me and get me to understand that she really did need to go, that she couldn't put up with it the way her life was anymore. And I agreed in the end that I would help. I would take her to Dignitas.